The United States has long, for many, many years, established intelligence that allow us to interdict and stop drug boats. And we did that. And it doesn't work. Interdiction doesn't work because these drug cartels, what they do is they know they're going to lose, 2% of their cargo. They bake it into their economics. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them. You blew it up. And it'll happen again. Maybe it's happening right now. I don't know.
On Tuesday, the United States government blew up a boat in the Caribbean. The strike killed all 11 people on board. President Trump says it was a Venezuelan drug boat. Marco Rubio said it as well. But the administration has so far offered no proof, nor has it said what authority the president was using to strike in international waters. One former senior law enforcement official told the New York Times the move was simply extraordinary. Quote, "In all of my years of doing this, I've never seen the U.S. military say, okay, this is a drug shipment, and then just blow it up." Joining us now, national security and Pentagon correspondent for the New York Times and MSNBC political contributor Helene Cooper. Paul Rieckhoff still with us. So, Helene, Marco Rubio is arguing that this is the only way to actually get them to stop, is just by blowing them up. What are you hearing inside the Pentagon about this?
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me. It's been almost a little surreal. Yesterday, there were many people at the Pentagon who expressed concern to us. And then there were some people who were like, this is what we need to do. This is a war on drugs. This is, we declare war on poverty, war on drugs. Let's make this kinetic, and kinetic is sort of the word that President Trump himself used when he described the strike. But at the same time, there's some caution being expressed by some other Pentagon officials because, for one thing, they still have not been able to articulate what legal authorization they're using for this. This is, several Pentagon officials suggested that the AUMF, remember back in after September 11th when Congress passed that authorization for the use of military force, is being now stretched to say that drug dealers are terrorists, and that's a very wide stretching of that authorization. So there was a little bit of concern at the Pentagon about that. There was so it's just, but this is the direction that this administration has been very determined to take the United States military. It's getting much more involved all around in more of what critics say is a political type of agenda. So this is just another one of them. It was a pretty extraordinary move, though. And it's really interesting, though, that Pentagon officials say that this could be just the start, that you could see more. You could see them going after higher value targets where you might see special operations troops climbing into boats and taking those people who they hope they might not necessarily kill them, but they're definitely talking about blowing up the lower value people as a statement of force.
Have they, is there a plan to offer proof? Are they telling you, Helene, just give us a few days, we're going to have a paper on this? What is the plan to prove
it was so strange yesterday, Katie. Getting any kind of information right now has become like pulling teeth. The sort of briefing that reporters normally would get, and where the Pentagon would put forward, talk about the operation, talk about the legal justification. We're not getting any of that. Several officials said that they were trying very hard to at least put out a statement that would explain what the legal justification is, but nobody is talking about offering any kind of proof that the 11 people allegedly who were on board this boat, which the military has been tracking for more than a week. Nobody was talking about or offering anything to show, any proof that shows that these people were transporting drugs. You've seen how the narrative has changed. President Trump said they were coming to the United States. Secretary Rubio said they were going to Trinidad. Then Secretary Rubio changed his story again and said, no, they were coming to the United States. So there's a lot that we don't know at this point. The only thing we do know is, we watched the video that President Trump put out, that black and white video video that shows a boat. You can't tell from the video how many people are on the boat. There was some skepticism at the Pentagon yesterday that that boat could fit 11 people. And why would you put 11 people on a boat that's transporting drugs? Wouldn't you want to create as much space for the drugs that you're transporting? Then there was a suggestion, too, that this could have been a boat that was carrying immigrants. So, there's a lot we don't know at this point.
Yeah. Secretary Hegseth just addressed this a moment ago. Let's listen.
We knew exactly who they were, exactly what they were doing, what they represented, and why they were going where they were going.
How do you know that?
Why would I tell you that?
Can you clarify
We have
something?
plenty of ways to determine how we know who is who. I said we smoked a drug boat, and there's 11 narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean. And when other people try to do that, they're going to meet the same fate.
Paul?
It's alarming, it's unprecedented, and it's dangerous. And it's the latest example of how Trump continues to overextend and abuse military power. I think it's maybe the most important and one of the most underreported stories in America right now. He keeps pushing the boundaries to places we've never been before. And let's flip it a different way. Not only did they kill 11 people, allegedly, they put American troops at risk. American troops could have died, right? And anytime you put American troops at risk, you owe the American public an explanation as to why. There is absolutely no accountability right now. There is no transparency. And there's the old saying, first send the country to war, then send the troops. We keep sending the troops first without getting the country behind them, whether it's National Guard deployments in Washington, D.C. and Chicago, or strikes like this. And we are going into literally now uncharted territory in terms of accountability and authority. And they're going to keep going because there is no backstop. There is nothing stopping them, and they're going to keep going.
Oh, gosh, I agree. I think this is one of the biggest stories out there, if not the biggest story out there. I'm so happy that you were here to talk about it. Helene, I'm so grateful that you could come on and bring your reporting and give us the firsthand count of what it's like trying to cover the Pentagon right now, because it sounds, it sounds interesting. I'll put it that way, put it diplomatically. It sounds interesting. Helene and Paul, thank you so much.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. There is a massive scandal that has been roiling the entire public health infrastructure of this country because the guy in charge of it is a dangerous crank with a pathetic record. And today, Americans had a chance to see just how dangerous and dishonest and just plain weird he really is. In less than a year, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has overseen the worst measles outbreak in this country in 30 years. He has limited access to vaccines with even more restrictions likely to come soon. He now has set his sights on the entire scientific foundation of American public health. It has provoked an unprecedented effort from former top health officials across the political spectrum, following the ousting of Trump's own director of Centers of Disease Control, Senate confirmed, picked by Trump, ousted because she was insufficiently loyal to Kennedy's own anti-vaccine crusade. Well, today, Kennedy was dragged before the Senate, huffing and puffing so the entire world could see yet again that he is, in fact, a dangerous crank. He tried to stick to his popular talking points on issues like chronic disease, but he was repeatedly caught lying and pivoted back to his anti-vaccine crusade. I mean, the whole game was laid bare from the opening moments when Kennedy used part of his opening statement to pay tribute to David Rose, the Georgia police officer who was murdered in the line of duty last month after a gunman opened fire on the CDC campus. Of course, what Kennedy failed to mention is that that gunman was reportedly radicalized by anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, the same kind of dangerous nonsense that Kennedy spent the morning promoting. And it was, to put it bluntly, a complete train wreck. When I said Kennedy was huffing and puffing his way throughout the hearing, I mean it literally. His audible breathing was so heavy throughout that at one point an aide seemingly had to remind him to mute his microphone when he wasn't speaking. As you're about to hear, he often forgot that advice.
I want to go back to just, again, some basic facts. Do you accept the fact that 1 million Americans died from COVID?
I don't know how many died.
You're the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You don't have any idea how many Americans died from COVID?
I don't think anybody knows that because there was so much data chaos coming out of the CDC, and there was so many perverse incentives. And these are modeled
You don't know the answer of how many Americans died from COVID. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Do you think the vaccine did anything to prevent additional deaths?
Again, I would like to see the data and talk about the data.
You have had this job for 8 months, and you don't know the data about whether the vaccine saved
and
lives?
that's the problem, is that they didn't have the data. The data by the Biden administration, absolutely dismal.
The Secretary of Health and Human Services doesn't know how many Americans died from COVID. Doesn't know if the vaccine helped prevent any deaths. And you are sitting as Secretary of Health and Human Services? How can you be that ignorant?
Did you, in fact, do what Director Monarez said you did, which is tell her to just go along with vaccine recommendations, even if she didn't think such recommendations aligned with scientific evidence? That is
No, I did not.
That's a yes or no. So you have an opportunity to call her a liar if you say that you didn't do it, but I'd like to see you respond to this.
No, I did not say that to her. And I never had a private meeting with her. So there are witnesses to every meeting that we have, and all of those witnesses will say, I never said that.
Are you aware that another one of these new members, Dr. Levy, wrote that, quote, evidence is mounting and indisputable that mRNA vaccines cause serious harm, including death, especially among young people? Yes or no? Are you aware that he said that?
I wasn't aware he said it, but I think I agree with it.
Should parents and schools of Colorado be prepared for more measles outbreaks as a result of that, Mr. Secretary?
Senator,
how about more mumps outbreaks?
I do not anticipate a change in the MMR vaccine. ACIP is an independent panel. So
well, it's a panel you just put those folks on. Far from what you said, they're people with ideas that are completely outside the mainstream.
You mean out of the pharmaceutical paradigm?
You are citing data that you won't produce to the public.
You're just
and you are rejecting
You're
science.
making things up to scare people, and it's a lie.
With respect, I do not think I'm the one making things
You
up.
are
Thank you,
lying
Mr. Chair.
right now, Senator.
You also told Senator Wyden at the outset that you didn't want to take vaccines away from people. I would say effectively we're denying people vaccine.
One particularly telling exchange was when Senator Elizabeth Warren called out Kennedy for lying when he pledged to leave vaccines alone prior to his confirmation.
Last November, while you were under consideration to become Secretary of Health and Human Services, Mr. Kennedy, you said, quote, if vaccines are working for somebody, I'm not going to take them away. No exceptions, no ifs, ands, or buts. You would not take away vaccines from anyone who wanted them. Then last week, you announced that the COVID-19 vaccine is no longer approved for healthy people under the age of 65. In announcing the change, you said the vaccine will be available for anyone who wants it. Now, obviously, both things cannot be true at the same moment. So let's clear this up right now, Secretary Kennedy. Will you tell America that all adults and all children over 6 months of age are eligible to get a COVID booster at their local pharmacy today?
Anybody can get the booster.
I'm sorry?
Anybody can get it, Senator.
Anybody. So you're saying that is now the official rule of HHS. Anybody is eligible to get a booster by just walking into the pharmacy.
It's not recommended for healthy people.
No. If you don't recommend, then the consequence of that in many states is that you can't walk into a pharmacy and get one. It means insurance companies don't have to cover the $200 or so cost. As Senator Dr. Cassidy said, you are effectively denying people vaccines.
We're not going to recommend a product for which there's no clinical data for that indication. Is that what I should be doing?
What you should be doing is honoring your promise that you made when you were looking to get confirmed in this job.
You're going like this.
And that is, you promised that you would not take away vaccines from anyone who wanted them. You just changed the classification of the COVID vaccine.
I'm not taking them away from people, Senator.
It takes it away if you can't get it from your pharmacist.
Well, most Americans are going to be able to get it from their pharmacy for free. Most Americans will be able to get it from their pharmacy free.
The question is everyone who wants it. That was your promise.
I know I didn't. I never promised that I was going to recommend products with which there is no indication.
When you said,
and I know you've taken $855,000 from pharmaceutical companies, Senator.
Did you hold up a big sign saying that you were lying when you said that? Because you are the one who said you would not take them away.
The entire performance was kind of like a weird Trump impression with very heavy breathing mixed in. Kennedy, as he saw, he was aggressive and he was truculent and defensive. He refused to answer questions with substance. He blustered his way through the whole thing, even when he was caught lying. And so now blue states are taking matters into their own hands. California, Washington, Oregon, and Hawaii are effectively forming their own health agency to maintain access to accurate data. Because, as Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington points out, RFK Jr. is, well, in her words, a charlatan.
You canceled $500 million of research because the mRNA technology is about continuing the research to be ready for the next flu, influenza, the next pandemic, and you have to do the research.
I'm happy to have a detailed discussion with you about it. You're so wrong on your facts.
You're interrupting me. And, sir, you're a charlatan. That's what you are. You're the ones who conflate chronic disease with the need for vaccines.
Senator Maria Cantwell is a Democrat of Washington, and she joins me now. I think your views of the secretary are pretty clear. Was there anything in today's hearing that dispelled concerns you had? Anything he said that you thought maybe changed your mind on anything, or was it kind of confirmation of your worst fears?
No, I think it's 7 months from his confirmation hearing, or almost 7 months. And what he did today is say that he really cares more about being combative than putting information out that grows the trust of the public on the delivery of a healthcare system. And so I found that very frustrating. The fact that he didn't want to discuss a strategy about either combating measles or combating a next generation COVID or pandemic, and that he really, wanted to be more performative about that. So coming from the Northwest, where we were hit first with the COVID outbreak, and we had to play a very big role. I was listening to your intro there, and I was thinking about the Institute of Health Metrics. They became like almost a household name overnight because every day they were providing metrics about COVID. So he doesn't want to be science-based, and I think that's what you saw today, a bipartisan response, Democrats and Republicans saying, wait, you are supposed to be the guy that believes and reinforces science, and you're not doing that.
I was so struck by that exchange about the COVID deaths where he said that the data was, it was in abysmal shape. I mean, putting that aside, I don't trust that he said that. I mean, we can all count excess deaths. It's clear as day. Every society on earth keeps track of its dead, and the United States does that. And we have excess deaths. We have the baseline, and we have excess deaths. Whatever you think about the data, and to deny that, over 1 million people lost their lives during this period above that baseline, whatever you think of that as CDC data, was a pretty shocking thing to hear, having, like most of the people watching this, everyone watching this, lived through that.
Well, that's the point, that science is based on accurate information and data. And science helps people who don't agree get around the table and agree. But if you have somebody leading this agency and you don't believe in that science and the information, it's hard to figure out how you're going to move forward. So I think you saw two of my Republican colleagues call into question his efforts to undermine the delivery of the measles vaccination, his unbelievable statements about the fact that he didn't want to say that the first effort in COVID and getting a vaccine in warp speed should be rewarded, and we should double down on that kind of research. He didn't want to say any of that. So I think it is for the Northwest a time when we're going to look to institutions who can deliver that kind of scientific efficacy and move our country forward, and hope that we can figure out some way to get people to pay attention, get the president to say, He should be calling him tonight. He should be saying, I want that money back in. Hey, I made a big move there in the first COVID situation, and I accepted something that in warp speed saved 2 million lives, according to his own Surgeon General, 2 million lives. And yet Secretary Kennedy doesn't want to accept that.
I want to bring in NBC's Sahil Kapoor, who's been following the hearing. Dr. Kavita Patel was a policy director in the Obama White House and is an MSNBC medical contributor. Former Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo is an MSNBC political analyst. With me here in studio, independent journalist Philip Bump and emergency medicine physician and former regional director at the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Derek Haas. Dr. Patel, Kennedy wrote an op-ed this week. He says his goal is to restore the CDC's focus on infectious disease, invest in innovation, and rebuild trust through integrity and transparency. Is that what you saw today?
No, and in fact, I would say those are great goals. That's actually what Dr. Menarez wanted to do at the CDC before the 29 days that she served was over. So I do think those goals need to then translate into action. And so far, the actions that have been taken actually undermine not only every single one of those goals, but Chris, we've talked about this. Frankly, patients today still cannot get the vaccine, and it's certainly not as easy as he made it sound.
Dr. Cass, toward the end of this hearing, and we sat here together, we heard Roger Marshall, another doctor, and Senator Kennedy talk about empowering parents to make decisions about vaccines. Is guidance from the CDC critical to the decisions they make? Because the suggestion seems to be that this is a somehow corrupt agency.
So again, it's not just guidance from the CDC and recommendations from the FDA, but it's also how those vaccines are available to parents, how they're available and paid for by insurers. Because even as a parent, if I want my child to be vaccinated, if my insurance won't pay for it or my pediatrician isn't available for a visit and I want to go to the pharmacy, right now in New York City, it's hard for me to do that. So you can empower parents to make decisions to get a vaccine. But what they're doing is they're dismantling the opportunities to actually make that happen on the ground. They're taking down the infrastructure that actually gets those vaccines into the arms of children, even if parents want to get them.
So when you heard him say repeatedly, we're not denying anyone vaccines.
Right. They're not banning vaccines. They're just making it really, really hard to get. They're putting the burden on parents, on individuals. They're taking down the federal responsibility to purchase vaccines in advance, to facilitate insurers for paying for them. And they're making it harder if you're a local pediatrician to serve your patients, because now you're going to get more children coming in for vaccination, more parents asking for notes for their kids, and you're going to have conversations that could have been happening with a pharmacist, but now are going to only be able to happen at the pediatrician's office while taking care of also potentially increasing infectious diseases, other regular childhood illnesses, and visits that kids need to get for, well care.
So, Congressman, it is hard to imagine another hearing with one of President Trump's cabinet secretaries in which some Republicans were this critical. I think that includes probably Pete Hegseth when he was going up against some pretty tough questioning about becoming defense secretary in the middle of the Signalgate controversy. What did you see here?
Well, a lot of frustrations for Republicans. Two main ones, Chris. Number one, Republicans have invested a lot of time and effort to get Trump nominees confirmed in the Senate. It's not easy. It takes up a lot of hours. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of questions that need to be answered. So the fact that the CDC director was fired just a month after being confirmed by the Senate, that's frustrating. The other big concern here for Republicans is swing voters. This is a public health issue we're talking about. Think about a lot of women who are the health care managers or decision makers in their homes that take care of making sure their kids are healthy. Think about states like Maine, North Carolina, where Republicans are going to have challenges, right? There are going to be Democratic candidates vying to flip those seats. That's another major concern for Republicans here, particularly Senate Majority Leader John Thune. The politics of all of this, it is not good when it comes to swing states and swing districts.
Philip, he mentioned North Carolina. Tom Tillis is retiring, and he was also one of the people who sat there and challenged very strongly what he was hearing and what he knew about Secretary Kennedy, particularly particularly about the firing of the former CDC director. Let's take a listen.
I don't see how you go over 4 weeks from a public health expert with unimpeachable scientific credentials, a longtime champion of MAHA values, caring and compassionate and brilliant microbiologist, and 4 weeks later fire her because, at least the public reports say, because she refused to fire people that work for her.
I said this before, they called him on a lot. And again, it wasn't just the Democrats, but does it have any impact on his future? It's one thing for a whole series of Republican senators to say you should step down, but could this move the needle?
Well, I mean, it certainly could move the needle. I mean, obviously, the decision maker here is primarily going to be President Trump. President Trump has proven
or
to be
100% going to be.
Right. Well, I mean, Kennedy could decide to, but pretty clearly he's not going to. But Trump has in the past been influenced by public opinion. I think the challenge here is that this entire hearing will be viewed through 2 different lenses, right? And the lens that I think most people bring to it is clearly Kennedy is in a position that he is not capable of actually fulfilling his duties, that he was pressed by people who were there to hold him to account, and he was not able to
he
back
couldn't
it up.
answer some basic questions.
Oh, yeah, very essential. And then he made up other statistics and said that his experts were, like Jay Bhattacharya, who's an economist, and Dr. Oz, who's a TV doctor. Like, those are the people he's relying on. But I do think it's worth pointing out, there's some polling came out this week from YouGov that found that overall about 50% of Americans have at least some confidence in the CDC for medical advice. Only 26% have confidence in RFK. The difference is among Republicans. Republicans have more confidence in RFK. And what they're going to see is someone who's fighting the system and fighting the elites and fighting the Democrats. And in that sense, he was successful, continued to build the political capital that he needs. And that's what Donald Trump's probably going to take away from this.
So, Sahil, when you look at that political reality, Democrats did seem to be chomping at the bit here. They did not bring a butter knife to a sword fight. What was the goal of their aggressive strategy?
Well, Chris, Democrats set the tone early with that joint statement calling on RFK to resign just before the hearing started. So it was really no mystery where they stood on the HHS secretary. They called him a charlatan. They called him reckless and dangerous. They accused him of making misleading and false statements and repeatedly came back to it. They came in knowing that RFK was going to make statements that they could try to disprove with other statements he's made and that he would deny saying things that he has in the past said. They claimed he has empowered conspiracy theorists, crackpots, and grifters to make life and death decisions on public health. Now, RFK repeatedly got feisty with some of the Democrats, talking back to them, interrupting them, accusing them of playing politics, and it led to several fiery exchanges. Take a look.
I hope that you will tell the American people how many preventable child deaths are an acceptable sacrifice for enacting an agenda that I think is fundamentally cruel and defies common sense.
Senator, you've sat in that chair for how long? 20, 25 years, while the chronic disease in our children went up to 76%. And you said nothing.
You're a charlatan. That's what you are. You're the ones who conflate chronic disease with the need for vaccines. Do you believe in doing something about that?
I want to fix the system, and that's what we're doing.
You unilaterally changed the parameters for giving vaccines, making it possible now, to Senator Cassidy's colleagues' points, that they're going to have to go off-label.
This is crazy talk. You're just making stuff up. You're just making stuff up, Senator.
I'm not
You're
making
just
stuff
making stuff up.
You know, sometimes when you make an accusation, it's kind of a confession, Mr. Kennedy.
Now, Chris, it's clear that RFK expected to tangle with Democrats. I'm not sure he expected to get quite the level of critiques and pointed questions that he got from Republicans, including, as you mentioned, Senator Thom Tillis, who's not running for re-election, does not have to worry about the politics of this at all, trying to get at the question of whether RFK is creating more chaos and instability after promising to bring stability to HHS and the CDC. The 2 doctors on the Republican side were the most notable in my estimation of this. John Barrasso, the Senate Majority Whip, a staunch ally of Trump. The fact that he was this pointed about his concerns regarding RFK's tenure at HHS and vaccines was very notable. Bill Cassidy as well, also walking a tightrope, running for re-election. Now, there is an awkward political dynamic surrounding all of this, Chris. Kennedy is, of course, a descendant of the famous Democratic political dynasty. He ran for president as a Democrat just 2 years ago before recognizing he didn't have a path and ultimately joining forces with Trump. There's not a lot of love for RFK, even among the Republicans on the committee. There is a lot of deference to President Trump, however, and that is where a number of, a lot of the support, if not all of the support for RFK is ultimately coming from. Does this hearing change that? I wouldn't discount the possibility, because we're seeing more criticism, as you noted, for this Trump appointee in a senior position than we have for, I think, any others.
Do you expect you're going to get a little pushback from the administration for getting involved in this?
Oh, I got a lot of pushback. I got phone call after phone call last night. They didn't want me to sign the discharge petition. They want to focus on the oversight investigation. They hate Thomas Massie more than they can hate any Democrat, which makes no sense to me. And they don't want to work with Democrats at all.
Hi again, everybody. Yes, it's that point in the Trump administration where we lead with Marge. It's 5 o'clock in New York. Hey, White House, your panic is showing. Yesterday, Marjorie Taylor Greene, typically a stalwart Donald Trump ally, called out the Trump administration for attacking her over her support for what she just said there, the discharge petition in the House, an effort put forward by Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, who she also mentioned, that would force a vote on releasing the full Epstein files. It's just transparency, basically. Apparently, the White House is privately trying to tamp down any support for transparency around the Epstein files, even though that is what an overwhelming majority of Americans, including MAGA voters, want. Publicly, we're hearing Trump's newest tactic to try to make this issue go away, calling the whole thing a, quote, hoax, to watch the survivors and their families of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's crimes say this.
We are tired of looking at the news and seeing Jeffrey Epstein's name and saying that this is a hoax. We are tired of it. We are done. We're not going to be silenced.
Mr. President Donald J. Trump, I am a registered Republican, not that that matters because this is not political. However, I cordially invite you to the Capitol to meet me in person so you can understand this is not a hoax. We are real human beings. This is real trauma.
This is the leader of our nation. This was no small thing. It wasn't irrelevant. It's not a hoax. There's testimony after testimony. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted. To hear the leader of their nation say things like that for us, it's gut-wrenching.
Those who have already been through so much trauma yesterday said that if no one else will, they'll name names. The government refuses to do that. Congressman Massie saying this, quote, survivors at our press conference announced that they are privately compiling their own Epstein list. They would be sued into homelessness for naming names, but Marjorie Taylor Greene and I are willing to name names in the House of Representatives under the constitutional speech or debate immunity. What a moment on the House floor that would be. I'd like to see that. As for Republicans signing on to Massie's petition, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of 3 Republican women backing the effort. She, along with super Trump allies Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace, who we saw leaving a meeting with Epstein survivors on Tuesday in tears, it looked like, are forming the GOP resistance from within. From reporting in the New York Times, quote, the gender divide within the House GOP on the Epstein case echoes one that emerged earlier this year in the Senate during fraught confirmation hearings for Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary who faced his own accusations of having abused women, all of which he denied. Then, as now, the women were under immense pressure from a vengeful White House to fall in line. In both cases, most of their male colleagues who had previously expressed hints of concern cited what they said were equally compelling reasons not to act on those concerns. Massie and Khanna say they are confident they will get the required 218 votes to pass their petition by the end of the month. That's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. Joining me at the table, former Criminal Division Deputy Chief at SDNY, MSNBC legal analyst and host of a new YouTube show, Courtside, Christy Greenberg's here, and former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs during the Obama administration, MSNBC political analyst Rick Stengel's here. Glenn Thrush, it's such an interesting piece of reporting from the New York Times to draw the parallel to Hegseth. He was accused of rape by someone at a conservative conference. The Monterey Police Department came out and reported it out or investigated it. And the pressure campaign against Joni Ernst was immense. She's now retiring. Are there, I hate to ask if MAGA Republicans are learning lessons from something like that, but is there a sense that they will not be bullied the way Joni Ernst was? Do they seem to be finding some political safety in their numbers between Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace?
Well, this is a political crisis that has just expanded, has just broken through every containment that the White House has put up around it, right? This looked initially, when we were first writing about this, as if it was a pretty big embarrassment, but a survivable embarrassment for Trump's law enforcement appointees because they had pushed all these Epstein conspiracy theories. Now what's going on, and it's happening at a point in time where Democrats are being pulled by the momentum of the midterms as opposed to the gravitational pull of the last election, and Republicans, and I think the Marjorie Taylor Greene position on this is extremely noteworthy because she is clearly looking towards a life after Donald Trump and a position in the party after Donald Trump, maybe the biggest position in the party after Donald Trump. So they are acting within their own post-Trump interests. And they are, from a political perspective, I think, seizing on an opportunity, in addition to their heartfelt feelings about this particular issue and their own personal experiences with this sort of trauma. But they are also, I think, seeing what Democrats have seen for years, which is Trump's enormous vulnerability with female voters and women in general in this country. He has a history that I think is something that very nearly cost him the election the first time he was elected, was drag on his majority the second time, and I think will now extend beyond his political career. And I think Democrats are now, there's been a lot of talk about what issues are the Democrats going to seize going forward. We saw in the RFK testimony today a ready-made TV commercial for the midterms for the Democrats on those issues. But I think the Epstein case has moved beyond sort of a boutique issue about conspiracy theories and the MAGA base into something much broader. And it is not good for the White House to have women from both parties standing at a podium criticizing a president whose principal political vulnerability is with female voters.
Super interesting. I just want to say there are no courage parades that we're going to throw for any of these women because they have 90% of all Democrats agree with their position, 86% of all independents agree with their position, 83% of all Republicans agree with their position, and 82% of all MAGA Republicans agree with their position. So it doesn't represent any political courage, Glenn, to your political points, but it is still an outlier. I mean, Megyn Kelly, who Donald Trump famously said that blood was coming out of everywhere, it was coming out of her eyes, is now so on board with MAGA and Trump that she accompanied RFK Jr. to your point, to his confirmation hearing. I mean, even the women who themselves were smeared by Donald Trump have come back into the MAGA fold. And I wonder if your reporting suggests that these three women are viewing this as a single issue departure from Trump, or if they're making a more significant break.
Who knows? I think what they're doing is what every politician does, which is they're taking advantage of a tailwind and seeing how far it takes them. Now, when we're looking at those numbers, if you blur your eyes, those numbers are very similar to the approval rating for gun control, for expanded background checks. And look where that went. So these supermajorities don't necessarily amount to anything, but I think it is noteworthy, and I think you're going to see more and more of this, much to the disgust and anxiety of the White House, which is people individual parts of the Trump coalition are starting to, again, see over the horizon beyond Trump and trying to figure out how it is that they're going to be able to leverage these issues when he's gone.